So we'll give you the whirlwind tour of heart rate zones in probably, we'll try to keep it to like 15 minutes because it's a Sunday night and we want to give you all your night back. We thought we'd start by just covering what are the different heart rate zones. So these are words that you might have heard before, but you might not have put them together in terms of what is the zone, how does it relate to your heart rate, and when would you actually use it? And I guess when do you transition from one zone to the next? So this is a pretty basic way of spelling them all out. So there's typically 5 zones. Also, you might see in different literature that some people break it down to just 3 zones, some do 7 zones, but most commonly it is these 5 zones. So from easy, which is less than 70% of max heart rate. So this is your easy recovery runs of the week. So for example, we go into the examples on the next slide, but it would be your midweek run done at a very, very slow pace. It helps with, it's all in the aerobic zone. So this is your slow endurance-based zone, and basically helps the body move. You should be finishing these easy zone runs feeling energized rather than lethargic.
It's talking pace. It's when we're talking about, we want your heart rate to be low. We want you practicing breathing out through the nose. And it's all using your aerobic energy system. So we have technically three energy systems, the aerobic and then the anaerobic and then what we call the CTP energy system. We don't really talk about the CTP because you literally burn it in like 5 seconds when you're sprinting. So for most of us, it's not really applicable. And so it's mainly aerobic versus anaerobic. And aerobic means that you're producing energy in the presence of oxygen. You're using oxygen to make energy versus anaerobic, which means that you're making energy in the absence of oxygen because you can't get enough oxygen in because you're working too hard for the demand of the muscles. The body demands more energy than you can produce. But when you're working in your aerobic zone, you could technically go forever. The limiting factor is actually not oxygen, it's actually glucose and then muscle fatigue. So yeah, it'll be the muscles fatiguing that will limit you. But yeah, as Kate said, this is your midweek easy run. Think of it as almost like a recovery run.
Actually, what Mike just said as well, it's interesting as you run in these different zones, you'll be familiar with different sensations. So if you've been out for a long run at this slow, easy pace, it generally is maybe your legs start to feel tired rather than if you do your interval sessions, for example, your legs might feel okay, but it might just be your breathing is out of control. So you're noticing the different zones, how it affects your body just in practical sense differently. So then zone 2 is steady, so 70 to 78% of max heart rate. These are approximate numbers. Obviously, they can shift slightly. So it's slightly harder than the zone 1, but still it's in that aerobic phase. So you're still building your base endurance here. And again, it's limited by muscle fatigue rather than how quickly you can take in oxygen, all those sorts of things.
And then we have the zone 3, which is what we call the tempo zone. And here you're using a combination. So you will be still using your aerobic energy system in part, but it also means that the energy demand on your system is greater than what you can produce the energy purely from oxygen. So you're going to have to start kicking into your anaerobic energy system. And when you use your anaerobic system, you create lactic acid as a byproduct. So this is when we start building up that lactic acid. So what you'll be fatigued here by is not only muscle fatigue, but also your cardiovascular system, that breathlessness and the inability to actually get enough oxygen in to fuel the muscles. And it's the 30 to 60 minute effort. It's also what we call the gray zone, which we'll break down in a second. However, this is where runners love to hang out. It's in the zone 3, and they do 80% of their runs at 80% effort. And then wonder why they're injured 80% of the time. That was a joke. But seriously, the gray zone. you want to work through it, but you don't want to be in the gray zone all the time. And you definitely need to work in this zone 3 sometimes, but not all the time, because zone 3 is very, very often race pace. It's where you'll be at race pace, where you're working, but you're not working so hard that you're purely in that anaerobic energy system and you're going to burn out. So yeah, we'll explain more in a sec on that.
Yeah, there is a time and place for tempo runs, but it's definitely where we spend the least amount of our training time. It's, just the benefit doesn't outweigh being in this zone. Then we hit threshold. Yeah. So we're getting higher up, so up to 89% of max heart rate. So now we're purely in anaerobic. So whereas threshold was sort of the border of the two, here we're purely in anaerobic. So this is less than 30 minutes of effort, so it's much shorter duration. We can't sustain efforts in this threshold zone for as long. And then we hit zone 5. So this is 90 to 95% of max heart rate, so it's almost maxed. We're not quite sprinting, but it is unsustainable for longer than 3 minutes. So we can't sustain this zone for very long. We're really pushing top max speed here. And this is where you're definitely going to be feeling everything is burning and your breathing's probably out of control.
Yes. Yeah, you're breathing hard. And there's almost like, I don't know for you, Kate, but for me, like, because I feel like as well there's different types of muscle fatigue. Like an easy run muscle fatigue, you just feel like a bit heavy and groggy. In like this one, the nervous system fatigue is like everything is heavy and hard, and it's like the whole system's fried. It's like you've just maxed out your engine and now it just needs time to cool off. Do you sort of like, how do you explain it?
I actually love being in the top heart rate zones, to be honest.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I have to be careful not to spend too long in those zones, because obviously they are super intense and obviously very demanding on the body. But yeah, no, I love sort of getting to the end of an effort and really maxing it out. And it's just, I find it's just the breathing for me is what gets me. It's just, you're just really sucking in air as soon as you hit the end.
Yeah.
And then we thought we'd run through what examples are of the different zones, so you can sort of put this into context rather than just hearing the theory behind it all, I guess. So as we said before, the easy is that midweek, really, really slow recovery run. So maybe you did a hard interval session the day before, and now you're just getting the legs moving again so that you're ready for your next hard session, whenever that might be later in the week. It also, think the warm-up and cool-down part of the sessions, obviously they're done at a really slow pace, just getting ourselves moving. So that would also be what we consider zone 1. Before moving steady, so it's still at a pretty low heart rate zone, respectively, but higher than the easy. So this would be, think, the long run of the week. So this is our Saturday long run. So we're keeping it in that aerobic zone. So remember the 3 tests. So we can either breathe through the nose, the heart rate, obviously, or the talkability test. So you can be having a chat with someone whilst running at this pace. So that's sort of the long run of the week. Before we hit our tempo, threshold, and VO2 max. So yeah, the tempo was, as we said before, pace you can hold for about 30 to 60 minutes. This is either typically longer interval training, so greater than 8 minutes. So we haven't really done much of this in our programs. As explained before, it's sort of more of that time trial-y, almost race pace zone where we don't want to spend too much time, which is why it hasn't been a focus in training. The focus for the interval type sessions has more been at zone 4, where it's that slightly higher intensity, where we're really pushing the pace and trying to build, get our body used to running slightly faster than race pace to work on the speed side of things. And then zone 5, so we're thinking VO2 max here. That would be, say, if you were on the track and you're just running an all-out 400-meter sprint, for example.
Perfect. Got nothing to add.
Okay, easy.
Why is it important to train the different heart rate zones? So as we said before, we're minimizing training at the level 3 zone. because the gray zone is a classic area where people set themselves up for injury. And there's a classic saying that runners generally run their easy sessions too hard and their hard sessions too easy. So their recovery runs are too quick to actually be a true recovery run, or even their longer runs are too quick to be purely aerobic, and their faster runs aren't fast enough to actually get a good training effect from. And everyone just stays in this zone 3 because it is that race pace, comfortable pace. However, gray zone will set you up for injury, and it will also cause your training to plateau. And so it's important to train the heart rate zones to prevent that, and also just to prevent overloading. So you're working your structures differently.
Yeah, I actually went to Japan with my running training group about 1.5 years ago, and we were running with some of the top Japanese and Kenyan runners who compete in the world circuit, absolutely amazing runners. So they're doing like 3-minute per Ks for marathon type distances, so really bloody quick. We did a couple of slow, what was sort of their easy runs of the week with them, and we were running 6-minute Ks. So even top elite runners, their easy runs are so slow, literally like twice as slow as they would be running in the race.
Yeah.
So to put that in perspective, most recreational runners would go out for their like easy run and might be doing, 5.5-minute Ks, which they're obviously not as elite as these top level runners. So it should be slower. So it's very easy to not sit on the extremes that we should be, and sort of drift towards the middle.
That Eliud Kipchoge, when he ran the sub 2 hours, same thing. They released his training plan, and he was running like over 6-minute Ks on his long runs, and he's the fastest man in the world. So it's very easy to slip into zone 3. So just be careful of that. Obviously, when you're working your different energy systems, you're going to get different training adaptations, which is really important, just from an overall health perspective, but also for performance. So it's important to just work through the full range of things to train your muscles to be able to produce energy, not only in the presence of oxygen, but also in the absence of oxygen. So we touched on that, didn't we? Teach your body to run quicker than race pace with higher heart rates. And then, work all the different energy systems, and also actually train different muscle fibers as well, because you do have slow twitch and fast twitch fibers. And generally, fast twitch fibers are harder to train, particularly after the age of 30. It's hard to develop more fast twitch fibers past that age, and we tend to lose fast twitch fibers quicker than we lose slow twitch fibers. The fast twitch fibers are the ones that give you your acceleration and your speed, and the slow twitch fibers are the slow burners. And you can actually see this by looking at the meats that we eat. So like cows or red meat, which is full of blood, right? It's full of oxygen, is red because it's full of oxygen. They're very slow twitch animals. Whereas our white meats, things like chicken, it's a white meat because it's not full of oxygen, because it's full of fast twitch fiber, right? So it's used to producing energy in the absence of oxygen. We need to train both, and we particularly need to train fast twitch as we age.
Yep. And I just think, it's important to stress the point about really training the body to run quicker than race pace as well, because I've had a couple of friends mostly who say they might have a time in mind to run a race. So let's just throw numbers out there. Let's say they want to run a 25-minute 5K, so that's average of 5-minute a K pace, and they do all their training at sort of just around the maybe 5:30-ish. So to expect to run on the day quicker than you've ever trained is kind of crazy. But I guess maybe unless you've had that explained to you and why you need to be practicing run quickly, it sounds so obvious, but it is something that people do forget, that we need to actually practice running quicker than what we're trying to race on the day, basically.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, because the other thing is half of the hitting the wall or that fatigue barrier is your brain trying to protect you, because it's detected that there's muscle breakdown because you've recruited all this energy. So it's going to increase your perception of fatigue, because it doesn't want you to keep running at that pace, because it's from a survival point of view, it doesn't really make sense if you're living in a savanna and now you have to go hunt for food and all sorts of crap. So if you're training at a pace, so by training at paces that are faster than your race pace, you're telling your brain that race pace is actually slow, and so you're less likely to hit a wall because your brain is used to running at faster paces. And so there'll be less neural fatigue as well. So yeah, super interesting, all that stuff.
The brain is very clever.
Very clever.
And then we've just thrown in a couple of other key points, I guess, the takeaways to end everything with. So we've pretty much touched the first one, but just the importance of training in all the zones, but avoiding the sort of mid-ground and only implementing that on occasion and for a specific purpose. The other really important thing to note is that the higher the zone, so particularly zones 4 and 5, the longer it does take to recover from. So again, it might seem really obvious. You're pushing your body at higher intensity, you're working really hard, so it is going to take longer to recover from. But the important takeaway here, I think, is therefore spreading out these sessions. So don't do hard sessions on back-to-back days because your body does need time to recover from that hard session. So from a practical point of view, this is why that we've structured the week with your Monday and Thursdays as the hard session. So you do have those 2 days in between. And if you can put in a really easy, rejuvenating run in the middle, that'll really help to prepare your body for the next hard day. But yeah, definitely avoid doing them back to back and give yourself enough time to recover.
And yeah, if you're not recovering from those sessions, make sure, consider decreasing the intensity on the second hard session of the week, or swapping it out for something that's more of a zone 1 or zone 2 effort instead. Because remember, you don't get strong in your training, you get strong in your recovery. And so if you've done a hard session for the week and you're still feeling it a few days later and you have another hard session to do, it's almost better to just back off the intensity a little bit, so that you can get a good training effect without overdoing it and then setting yourself up for injury. Because we know Kate and I did this online running symposium last week, which was amazing. They had some really, really good presenters there, like run coaches, physios, whole bunch of people. And they were saying like the main cause for people not to reach their goals is time away from training because they're injured. So really, really important, if you've had a really hard session on Monday, just back off the intensity a little bit on Thursday. If you've been in zone 4 and 5 on Monday, pull back that session so you're not in zone 5. Maybe just hang out in zone 4. And that's where it can be okay to slip into zone 3 a little bit and just work through a little bit of those zones, and even pull into zone 2. So you're working in different zones without pushing it right up into zone 5.
Yeah. And also don't be afraid to change the schedule around to suit how your body's feeling as well. Like if you're feeling you just need another day before a hard run session, maybe swap your strength and running session for that week and just do what fits in with how your body's feeling. You don't have to stick day by day to the schedule necessarily, but do spread out the hard days is the takeaway.
Yeah. And do keep in mind you will recover from the sessions differently. So I think that's like Kate's, said she really likes that really hard 400-meter effort stuff. That can take me 3 days to recover from an effort like that. So I tend to recover better from things like, rather than 400-meter efforts, things that are a little bit longer where I'm still sort of in that higher zone range, but like 800-meter efforts, so it's a slightly lower zone. Whereas you might be the different, you might be opposite. I don't know, but people just recover from different sessions differently. So keep that in mind too.
Yep. And then the only other point to touch on is that the majority of the training week ideally should be spent in those lower zones, so in zones 1 and 2. So that's why, for the most part, and you have to keep in mind that the time is accumulated between, say, your warm-up and your cool-down is zones 1 and 2, your easy run of the week, zone 1 and 2, and your long run is zone 1 and 2. So if you add up all of that time, that should definitely be the majority of the week, with the higher intensity stuff, just those couple of sessions where you push your body into those higher zones. And that's about it. I hope that covers off most of the questions that people might have had, or clarifies some of the. It's a pretty confusing topic, to be honest.
It
And
is.
there's
It
so
is a
much,
confusing topic.
and there's just so much information out there that doesn't necessarily put it all together. So I know
Yeah.
like aerobic and anaerobic and is thrown around all over the place, but not necessarily aligned to the different training zones, or heart rates aren't lined up to anaerobic and aerobic and all those sorts of things. So hopefully that really puts it into context together for everyone, and helps from a practical side of things as well. Know, oh, this session relates to this zone, and this is why we train in these higher zones versus the lower zones, and avoid maybe the middle bit. So yes, if you do have any other questions, though, definitely let us know, because it's a very
don't worry. Don't worry if you're confused. The scientists are confused. They can't even come up with like singular definitions for these things, right? So that's part of the problem, is when we're looking at the research, there's so many different definitions for what constitutes the different zones, how many zones there are, what is the anaerobic threshold, where does that cut off to the aerobic threshold, all these sorts of things. And to be honest, they're all blurred lines. There is no black or white rule. So yeah, if you're a little confused, don't worry. Everybody is, including the professionals. But as long as you get the main takeaways, that you need to be working through different zones, avoiding zone 3, still occasionally running at race pace, but not always training at race pace. And ask us anything else that may be burning for you.